Have you ever heard of the T-72 tank? For decades, it was the iron fist of the Soviet Union, a symbol of their military might. With over 25,000 built, it was one of the most produced tanks in history, serving in armies all over the world. The Soviets weren't just proud of it, they were confident it could go head-to-head with anything the West had to offer. It had a massive 125mm smoothbore gun, advanced composite armor, and a low profile that made it a difficult target. On paper, it was a beast. Soviet military doctrine was built around legions of these tanks sweeping across Europe. They believed the T-72, especially its export versions, was more than a match for American tanks like the M60 and even the newer M1 Abrams. This confidence was about to be put to the ultimate test, not in the fields of Europe, but in the deserts of the Middle East. The stage for this dramatic showdown was the 1991 Gulf War. After Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Kuwait, a massive US-led coalition was formed to push them out. The Iraqi army was one of the largest in the world at the time, and its armored fist was made up of hundreds of Soviet-made tanks, including the T-72. This was the moment of truth. For the first time, the best of Soviet export hardware would face the best of American technology in a full-scale conventional war. Military analysts and observers around the world held their breath. Would the T-70 live up to its fearsome reputation? Would it prove that Soviet tank design was superior? Baik and Moscow's Soviet generals were watching closely, confident that their flagship tank would prove its worth and validate decades of military strategy. They were about to receive a very rude awakening. The main event was Operation Desert Storm, the ground phase of the war. On February 24, 1991, coalition forces crossed into Iraq and Kuwait. What followed was a stunning display of military power that shocked the world, especially the Soviets. The American M1 Abrams tanks, along with British Challengers, sliced through the Iraqi defenses, and the Iraqi T-72s, they were being systematically annihilated. From a distance, often beyond the range where the T-72s could even fire back, the Abrams tanks were picking them off one by one. Their advanced thermal sights allowed them to see the Iraqi tanks long before the Iraqis could see them. It was like a sniper taking out targets from a mile away. One of the most famous and brutal examples of this was the Battle of 73. Here, a single American armored cavalry troop ran headfirst into a brigade of the Iraqi Republican Guard. It should have been a tough fight. Instead, it was a massacre. In just under an hour, the American forces destroyed dozens of Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles with minimal losses. The T-72s, caught completely by surprise, were hit by the Abrams' powerful depleted uranium sabot rounds. These rounds cut through their armor like a hot knife through butter. The results were catastrophic. Many T-72s suffered what's called a jack-in-a-box effect. When the shell penetrated the hull, it would ignite the ammunition stored in the carousel autoloader directly under the turret. The resulting explosion would blow the entire turret clean off the tank, often sending it spinning high into the air. Back in Moscow, Soviet military officials were watching the news reports and intelligence briefings with a growing sense of horror and disbelief. They saw the footage, endless lines of burnt-out, decapitated T-72s littering the desert. These weren't just any tanks. These were their tanks, the backbone of their allies' armies, and a key export product. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their prized creation was being destroyed with almost casual ease. At first, there was denial. Some officials tried to dismiss the results, claiming the Iraqi crews were poorly trained and lacked motivation. They argued that the tanks used were downgraded monkey models, export versions with inferior armor and fire control systems compared to the ones used by the Soviet army itself. They insisted that a properly crewed, top-of-the-line Soviet T-72 would have fared much better. While there was some truth to these claims, the Iraqi crews were indeed outmatched in training and tactics, and the export T-72M was less advanced. It couldn't explain the sheer scale of the disaster. The problem wasn't just the crews, it was the technology. The American M1 Abrams had a suite of advantages that proved decisive. Its thermal imaging was a generation ahead, allowing it to acquire and engage targets at night and in bad weather from miles away. Its fire-controlled computer was incredibly accurate, ensuring a high probability of a first-round hit. And most importantly, Its Chabum composite armor and depleted uranium armor packages offered vastly superior protection. The T-72's gun, while powerful, struggled to penetrate the Abrams frontal armor, while the Abrams gun could destroy a T-72 from almost any angle. The devastating performance of the T-72 in the Gulf War sent shockwaves through the Soviet military establishment and the global arms market. It was a public relations nightmare. Countries that had bought or were considering buying the T-72 suddenly had second thoughts. If it performed this poorly against American technology, what was the point? The myth of Soviet tank superiority, carefully cultivated for decades, was shattered in just 100 hours of ground combat. This wasn't just about a single piece of equipment. It was a crisis of confidence for the entire Soviet military-industrial complex. Their whole approach to tank design, which prioritized firepower and a low profile over crew survivability and advanced electronics, was called into question. The fallout was immediate. Soviet tank designers were sent scrambling back to the drawing board. They knew they had to respond. This led to a crash program to upgrade the T-72 and develop its successor. The result was the T-90, which was essentially a heavily upgraded T-72. The T-90 incorporated lessons learned from the Gulf War. It featured new, more advanced composite armor, an improved fire control system, and a defensive aid suite called Stora, designed to jam incoming anti-tank missiles. The goal was to close the technological gap with the West and restore faith in Russian armor. They also worked to improve crew survivability, trying to address the fatal design flaw of the autoloader that led to the jack-in-the-box explosions. So, was the T-72 really a bad tank? Not necessarily. In the right hands, and against opponents of a similar technological level, it was a formidable weapon. It was relatively cheap, simple to maintain, and packed a big punch. For many armies around the world, it was, and still is, a perfectly adequate tank. However, the Gulf War exposed its critical weakness. It was a product of a different era and a different design philosophy. It was built for massive, sweeping armored assaults, not for the kind of high-tech long-range duels that characterized modern warfare. The conflict was a brutal lesson that in modern combat, it's not just about how big your gun is or how thick your armor is. It's about seeing the enemy first, hitting them first, and surviving the first hit. The Americans, with the M1 Abrams, had mastered that formula. The story of the T-72 in the Gulf War is a fascinating chapter in military history. It's a tale of how technology, tactics, and training can completely upend long-held beliefs about military power. The sight of their own tanks being blown apart on television screens was a wake-up call for the Soviets, forcing them to rethink their entire approach to armored warfare. It marked the end of an era and demonstrated, in the most dramatic way possible, the dawn of a new age of digital high-tech combat. The legacy of that desert war continues to influence tank design and military strategy to this very day. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this look into military history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories like this. See you next time.